Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel, and look what we have on the workbench today, another stunt truck. This one is from Corally and it's called the Dementor. Now, if you don't know who Corally is, they've actually been around for a very long time, as far back as I've been racing, I think, actually. They were very well known back in the day for 12-scale racing cars, really high-end type stuff, and you know, the company has obviously expanded over time, and now they have a full lineup of kind of basher type of vehicles, A-scale vehicles such as this. So it's kind of exciting to see, you know, how they've grown over the years, and they still have the competition line, and now we're going to get into this off-road stuff that they have, and starting off with the Dementor. Hopefully we'll get some of their other cars here on the channel, but for now we're just going to concentrate on this one, and it's pretty cool looking. I will say that there was a lot of talk about this vehicle when it was first announced, and a lot of people say it's a copy of an ARMA vehicle that is out there, and it does have a bit of a similar look. But, you know, this is a stunt truck, and stunt trucks, they do have a certain style to them that work well, and ARMA identified that, and that's what they came out with. And this is just another one in the segment. I did wish that they went and changed the look a little bit more to make themselves a bit more unique, but there are some differences, and there are some big features to this chassis. You know, we're going to get into all the details, and we'll maybe see why this one might be a better choice for you. You know, I definitely want to give this thing a full workout. So let's start off with the body. And it's got this kind of resto mod truck body on there, very low slung, so it sits very low on the chassis, and you know, it's got a sleek look to it. The graphics are a bit odd. It looks like it's got some sort of rust thing going on, and the decals on it pretty cool. Flat nose to it, and just a roll bar for looks basically, but the rear of it is all cut out, so it sits very low. You can see right here how it's cut out, and it sits low and around the shocks. So when you are going and you know, doing stunts and stuff and flips, and if you land on the hood, there's much more of a chance that the wheels will go and grab and flip you back over when you're ripping on the throttle. But overall, decent look. Now let's get into the chassis features. And again, it's got this short wheelbase thing going on, basically a buggy style of chassis with truggy arms on there, and that combination really makes for a great stunt vehicle where you go and do backflips, and you really have this unique control over the vehicle. All right, so let's start off with the front, and it's got some really, really nice shocks on here, all aluminum. So we've got aluminum cap, which is pretty important for a stunt vehicle, and then an aluminum body, and it is threaded, so you could adjust the preload with the spring collar here, also aluminum. It's got a nice tall perch for the spring, so that hopefully won't pop out when you're doing flips and cartwheels and stuff like that from crashing. And it's also got steel standoffs up top, and then mounted to a, looks like a 3mm thick shock tower on there. So the shocks, they do feel really good, nice and plush, with some pretty decent pack to it, so when you are landing off of big jumps, hopefully that just absorbs a lot of the impact. And overall, I gotta say, I do like the shocks. It's got red collars on here, and that is Corally. Corally, for as long as I've known, their anodizing color has been red and black, so that fits right in, and even silver. So the shocks are already saying Corally to me right off the bat. All right, now moving farther out on the suspension, they went with a pivot ball style of suspension, and this is a great style of suspension setup as far as there's less moving parts in here, so if something were to break, there's less to possibly you know, repair. But what I like about it is, although it's a great suspension setup, it does have some flex to it, and for something that's going to be probably doing cartwheels and flips and stuff like that, it's going to take some of that impact versus rather braking. And the arms themselves look pretty rigid. I mean, there is, like, again, there is some flex to it, but they have some nice webbing that goes on the top arms, and the bottom arms are pretty solid, so it looks like they've got a nice design on there. And then the inner hinge pin pivots are aluminum. They're aluminum plates with composite plastic cover caps on them. Steel hinge pins, of course, top and bottom. Some adjustment there as far as caster goes. You can go and tweak that a little bit. And then farther out on the arms, looks like some nice steel pivot balls that go into the steering knuckle. And the steering knuckle is actually universal to both sides, so if you were to get extra parts, you won't need a left and a right. It is universal between the two. And then it has an aluminum steering arm plate that links up to the steering links. So looking good there. We also have some sway bars on the front, and let me move on to the rear suspension because it's similar to the front. As far as we've got the big bore shocks on the rear, same sort of makeup as far as the aluminum body and aluminum cap with the steel post. However, in the rear, looks like we have a 5mm thick shock tower, so that is much better than the thinner one that's in the front. And you know, I will go and say that the one in the front is braced. It does have a brace that goes down to the chassis brace, so you know, hopefully there is no problems there if you do go and nosedive this thing into something. But again, back to the rear suspension, it is somewhat of a flexible arm, but it does not have a lot of openings in there. It's all filled in, all the webbing is filled in, so it should be a pretty rigid arm. Although I think I would have liked to have seen a little bit more meat at the end of the arm where it attaches to the rear knuckle. And the rear knuckle, I will say, is pretty bulky. And a number of suspension tuning options there as far as holes on the arms, holes on the shock towers, holes on the hubs to alter the roll if you want to, but I'm guessing that this thing is pretty well set up out of the box as far as the suspension tuning is going. And again, the rear feels just as good as the front, and the upper turnbuckles are adjustable, so you can go and adjust camber there, and it's a nice, thick, heavy-duty tie rod, it looks like. All right, now let's move on to the drivetrain on this. And so we've got your standard A-scale buggy, truggy style of drivetrain where you got a front diff, you got a center diff, then you got a rear differential. The front does have universals on it, really nice looking universal. It's got a heavy duty 5mm shaft to the universal, and the pins are actually captured with it looks like a spring basically. It's a wire just wrapped around where the cross pin goes, so that should hopefully hold everything in place. And then the center is kind of your standard dog bones, and then in the rear is dog bones as well. And as you would guess, it's got metal outdrives throughout. It's got ball bearings. Now, the differentials themselves, it does have a nice machine ring gear in there. It's got a larger bevel pinion in comparison to some other A-scale vehicles out there, and that just helps in the durability department. So I think they got the gear ratios right to keep everything in check. But the one thing I do want to mention about the differentials is they're only grease filled, and in the instruction manual, I did go and read that, you know, it said to replace your silicone oil in the differentials every 50 runs or so, but I wanted to go and check to make sure there was silicone oil in there, and I did find grease in there. So that is a little bit of a thing where you're probably going to want to go and get silicone oil right off the bat, because this thing is going to have a lot of power. It's 6S power, and it's just going to diff out. And so you're going to want that oil to stiffen up the differential action, so it's not going too wild when you're out there doing stunts and stuff. So just a heads up, might want to go grab some oil for that, and I'll put in the description below what they suggest in the manual. Now over to the center differential, there is a steel spur gear there as well, and the motor plate is a really nice looking motor plate where you could access it pretty easily with screws on the top, and it does look like it has enough of a slot there so you could go and put some larger pinions on there if you're the type of person that wants to go for some more speed or something. All right, so that pretty much wraps up the drivetrain. 17mm wheel hexes on all four corners. And let's move on to the steering now before I get to the chassis. So, dual bell crank steering setup with servo saver, kind of your standard A-scale thing going on here. It's got an aluminum Ackerman plate between, and then, of course, adjustable tie rods out to the steering knuckles, as I mentioned before. Now we can get onto the chassis, and it's a 3mm thick chassis, and you know, pretty bare on the bottom. Not a lot of holes or anything like that. What I really like is these mud guards here. The screws go in from the top, actually. They got a nice little red washer on there just to make sure that those are held in there stiff. A little bit of a bevel to the edges of the sides here for stiffening. A little kick up in the front. And, you know, it's kind of your standard A-scale setup again. Got composite plastic chassis stiffeners going down from the rear bulkhead and the front upper plate down to the chassis. And they don't go all the way to the center diff housing. They get pretty close. So hopefully this chassis won't bend, but that's kind of where your bend point is. And let's see, there is a little bit of flex there already. So that's something I'm definitely going to watch out for and report to you guys after I'm done bashing this thing. But again, it's got this front top race as well. Some pretty solid body mounts, it looks like, as well. And then in the center, it also has this top plate, which, you know, on other vehicles, that's for when you're bashing, and hopefully it doesn't crush down on things, but it's very far away from the top of the body. So that's something I wanted to mention to you guys. But one thing I do like about this is it's got a neat decomposable center diff mount where when you pull out basically, I think it was just 4 screws, you could take the whole top plate off and then remove the differential pretty easily for maintenance or oil swap. So that's pretty cool. Same with the front diff, really easy to access as well. Just, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it was like 6 or 7 screws. Okay, let's move on to the electronics now. It does have a 20 kg servo in here, high torque, metal gears, of course, and then it does have a metal steering horn on there Very nice to see from the factory. And then moving back to the motor, it is a Corally motor, and forgive me, I'm probably going to butcher the names of some of this stuff here, but it's the Curon 825 motor. It's a 2050 kV motor. It actually has a really cool look to it with all the Corally logos on there and everything, and red anodizing, black anodizing, a little bit of a heatsink fin going on. You might want to go and pick up a cooling fan. We'll see how that runs. And over here is the Torx 185 speed controller. Has that hobby wing look to it with a red case, and it's got XT90 connectors on there, heavy duty wire, and waterproof, of course. So you know, you can't go and splash through the mud. I'm not sure if I would go directly into water because I'm not sure if the receiver is waterproof. It is tucked away in this receiver box here, but it's not exactly a sealed receiver box. So that's one area to look out for if you're going out in the wet stuff to drive this thing. Now, as for the battery tray, it's over here on this side of the chassis, and it's got some pretty large Velcro straps in there. I did go and strap in my SMC 8000 milliamp 6S pack, and it just fits in there. But you could go ahead and use two 2S packs if you're running a 4S, or you know, some narrower 3S packs when you go to run 6S. And there are 2 plugs, so you can run 2 individual, or you can run 2 batteries in there versus just having one large pack. But you know, there is some space in there definitely to fit some packs. Kind of wish I had a taller front plate in there just to prevent the batteries from sliding out if you do go and stack them on top of each other, because I know some people do stack their batteries versus laying them up on their side. And that's pretty much makes up the center of the chassis. Now let's just talk about the rear really quick. And it's got this pretty heavy duty wheelie bar thing going on. There's actually aluminum plates here that make up the wheelie bar that go up to these pretty gnarly looking wheels. There's some composite bracing there as well to make up that wheelie bar. And then right in front of it is the spoiler with a pretty heavy duty wing mount as well. And it's got to be, if you're just going crazy flipping this thing off of jumps and stuff like that, this all has to be heavy duty. And it looks like it's going to take some abuse. This feels pretty solid out back. Hopefully that doesn't bend in some tumbles. Up front, we've got your standard buggy front bumper. Overall, it's got a decent look to it, and I think it's going to perform well. It definitely does have that look like it's going to be a lot of fun when you're out there jumping and stuff. All right, now let's move on to the radio, the S2R radio. At first, I was like, this thing looks a little small, but after I started to just kind of, you know, check it out a little bit closer, I do like the way it feels. 4AA batteries go in the bottom. You're going to have to supply that. It's got a rubber grip out back, and it has a nice large foam steering wheel on there. And your standard trims, your steering reverse, dual rate, and then digital throttle and steering trim there. So pretty decent radio. We'll see how that works. And then there's really not much else in the kit. They go ahead and give you an antenna tube, so you could go and put that in, and then just your instruction manual stuff. So we got a manual for your radio, a manual for the vehicle, and then a manual for the speed controller. All right, that I think wraps it up. No, I forgot to talk to you guys about the wheels and tires. We've got some pretty nice looking wheels on here, black spoke wheels. Again, 17mm hex on there, and then these really large lug tires. Kind of a nod to a Proline Badland, but not a copy. And it's got some medium inserts in there, so I'm going to assume that these tires are going to grow, especially if you're going to go and run this thing on 6S. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to strap a 6S battery pack in here. We're going to go outside, and we're going to have some fun with the Dementor. All right, I just got back from some serious bashing with the Corally Dementor, and I'm proud to say it actually came back running. That's always a bonus, but we do have a lot to talk about because there are a couple of bent parts on here, and this truck does some pretty cool stuff. So to start off, basically, I threw a 6S battery pack in here, pull full throttle as soon as I put it down on the ground, and it did a backflip and just scratched up the top of the body. And usually I like to start off, kind of simple and doing small stuff and then ramp up to the big stuff. But this thing has a ton of power on tap. And as soon as you touch the throttle, basically, it just transfers a ton of power to the front, which means that center differential grease isn't really doing squat in there, to be honest with you. This truck really needs some oils. That's one thing I figured out in the first 1 minute of driving it is on 6S, it really needs a whole differential redo on it. However, I'm going to skip ahead because towards the end of driving this thing, I did drive it on 3S, and the grease was fine in that respect. The truck was manageable to drive. There was still some transfer power to the front, but I think a lot of people are just going to go out and run this thing on 6S. That's what it's all about. So just keep that in mind. If you're using smaller packs, like maybe a 3S or a 4S, it'll be fine out of the box. Anything more than that, you're going to just have to go right ahead and swap out the oils. And what I'm going to suggest, I'm thinking maybe 50,000 in the front, 100,000 in the center, and 20,000 in the rear. That's what I'm going to start off with when I switch everything out on here. But yeah, it's got a ton of power, a ton of rip. The speed controller is programmable. You can program the punch on it, set at level 3, and I can't imagine what any other higher level would be. I think it'd be way too much. I'd probably want to go back down one to level 2. But it has a lot of power. When I was able to kind of squeeze the power on, it would just carry the front wheels, and if I pull a little too much, it would just pull the wheels up even farther, and it's got a lot of power. I will say that. It's got a ton of power with this short wheelbase. It's wheelies galore. And of course, on the other end of that is braking. It's got a ton of brake out of the box as well. I think I want to go in and program that. Just kind of tame the brakes down, because when you stab on the brakes, the front end just drops really, really quick, and even kind of easing into the brakes, it just seemed like a bit much. All right, so now let's jump into the steering on the Dementor, and it's got a pretty wide steering path to it. I wasn't able to break the rear end of it free. A lot of that power, again, goes to the front of the vehicle, and even the front diff starts to balloon one wheel depending on which way you're turning, and that kind of makes it push a bit. I probably would have liked to have seen a little bit more steering in here. The servo is a little on the sluggish side, so you might want to go and swap that out with maybe a Savox servo if you're really going to go start bashing this thing, want it to turn better. But again, in that 3S use, I found it to be okay, and then in 6S, that's when it was just a bit uncontrollable. So if you want that monster power, you're going to have to make some tweaks to this vehicle. Handling wise, I really like the shocks on here. I think they did really well. You do have to go in and adjust the preload collars a little bit. The truck does settle in just a little bit and starts to sag a little bit, so you have to go in there, reset your ride height with your preload collars on your shocks. That's not really a big deal, but it does seem to damp the bumps and jumps pretty well. If you're going huge off of some big jumps, it will bottom out and you have that chassis slap, and it does pop back up. So it depends on how you want to use it. If you want to go big air, you might have to go a little bit heavier in the shock oil. And that's really it as far as the performance stuff goes. It's got a lot of potential behind it. It is going to need some tweaks, in my opinion, and I mentioned those. I kind of harped on them a little bit. Now I got to go on to the durability, and as I mentioned, it did come home in one piece. It is still driving, but there's a couple things that bent, actually, and broke that is going to need to be repaired. So let me pull the body off. I'll start off by saying I did check the chassis. There is a slight bow to the chassis right now with all the driving I've done, but however, the body does drop back on, so I will say that it isn't too much to where the body doesn't even fit anymore. What did I break? I broke the front stiffener bar that goes to the shock tower. The shock tower still seems straight, but that bar did crack, and I did land this thing on the nose a bunch of times. Another thing that went wrong up front is I did bend a steering tie rod. I didn't break it, I did bend it. And another thing that happened to the front was the front suspension arm actually twisted down and around, so it didn't break, but this pivot ball suspension twisted, so the arms are nice and flexible. You don't have to worry. I don't think you have to worry about the arms breaking on this, but I did have to go and just pop everything back out. And then finally, the body kept on getting tucked under the front bumper. Not such a big deal. I already talked to you guys about the chassis, and then the rear wheel over here is bent a little bit as well. And that was just, you know, just going wild with it, going crazy, going with some pretty big air when I was on 6S, and it did bend it. So, you know, here's the thing, like, you know, this is a stunt truck. You're going to go big with it, and things can happen. And, you know, I told you everything that happened during my test sessions with it. Oh, one other thing, it did go into thermal cutout. I did want to mention that as well. It was a speed control that cut out on me, and it happened twice while I was running. So just a heads up on that as well. And I was running it on a 45-degree day, so it was rather cool outside. The fan was working, but that was something I wanted to mention to you guys. But I would say this truck shows a lot of promise. It shows that it can be fun. I think it's priced pretty well, and that may be right up your alley. Price point is a big deal with a lot of people, and you're getting a lot of truck that can give you a lot of fun. So what do you guys think? Do you think Corally is going to catch on? Do you think we're going to see more from them? Let me know in the comment section below, and while you're there, hit that subscribe button and the notifications bell, because I'm sure we're going to do more with the Corally coming up in future videos, and I don't want you to miss it.